Abigail Carter set her fork down without a sound, rose from her husband's table, while 11 guests were still laughing at her, and curtsied to him. Low, slow, perfect, the way a servant curtsies to a master. Nathaniel Carter raised his glass and never once looked up. He had no idea he had just watched his wife leave him. Before we go on, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me all the way to the end of this story. And tell me in the comments what town or city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight. The summer of 1817 had been kind to Virginia, and no man in Caroline County said so louder than Nathaniel Carter. 12 chairs at his supper table. 11 of them full of men who owed him something. A note of favor, a road easement, a word in the right ear at the courthouse. He sat at the head, as he always sat, with his sleeves turned back against the July heat, and a glass in his hand that a girl named Ruth kept filling, whether he asked or not. 400 acres in wheat, Judge Peyton was saying. 400 Carter and I hear every stalk of it stood up straight through that June wind. It stood. How? Because I told it to. The table laughed. Nathaniel let them. He had a way of letting a room laugh, a way of holding still in the middle of it like a stone in moving water, and men mistook that stillness for depth. It was not depth, he simply liked the sound, down the length of the table, past the platters and the sweating pitchers. Abigail Carter listened to her husband take credit for a windbreak of loblolly pine. She had walked out and marked herself in the spring of 1814, stake by stake in mud up to her ankles. She said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that the correction was never worth the cost of it. Mrs. Peyton leaned toward her. "You've been quiet, my dear." "I'm listening, ma'am. To them." The older woman's mouth twitched. "Whatever for, habit." Mrs. Peyton laughed and touched her wrist, and for a moment Abigail thought the evening might pass. The way all the others had passed, long, warm, forgettable, done. Then Colonel Ames set down his glass and looked at her the way men look at something they can't place in a catalog. "Mrs. Carter, forgive an old man for saying so, but you're not like the other ladies in this county." The table quieted, interested. "No, sir. They tell me you'd sooner be out at the drying barns than in a drawing room in Richmond. That true?" "It's true I know the barns better." "And is that by choice, ma'am, or by—" He caught himself, but only halfway. "By preference." It was a small cruelty, the kind that gets served politely, and Abigail had eaten 100 of them without complaint. She opened her mouth to answer it kindly. Her husband answered first. "Colonel." Nathaniel lifted his glass, and the candlelight swung along the rim of it. "Let me spare my wife the trouble." Thomas Reed, 2 seats down, said quietly, "Nate." Nathaniel didn't hear him, or heard him, and didn't care which in that house had always amounted to the same thing. "My wife," Nathaniel said, "was never meant for important rooms." Somebody chuckled, a low, uncertain sound testing the water. "She's a plain woman from plain people, and I say that with affection. She keeps a house warm, she keeps it quiet. And gentlemen, after 11 years, I'll tell you honestly, a man doesn't need another voice at his table demanding to be heard. He needs peace. Abigail is peace." He drank. The room broke open with laughter. It was not vicious laughter. That was the worst of it. It was easy, comfortable, agreeable laughter. The laughter of men who assumed the woman at the far end of the table had heard the compliment buried in it, because a compliment was surely in there somewhere. Abigail's hand stopped over her plate. She did not flinch. She did not color. Ruth, standing against the wall with the pitcher, watched her mistress's hand come to rest and stay resting, and would remember it for the rest of her life, the stillness of it, like a bird deciding. Thomas Reed was looking at the tablecloth. Mrs. Peyton had stopped smiling, and Abigail Carter lifted her eyes and looked at her husband. Not with anger. Anger she'd used up years back, quietly alone in a linen closet after a miscarriage he never came home for. This was something else. It came over her face slow and clean, like water clearing. She understood him, finally, completely without hope. She understood exactly who she had been married to for 11 years. And it had taken him only 40 words to say it out loud, in front of every man of consequence in Caroline County. She set her napkin down. "Gentlemen?" She stood. Chairs scraped. Half of them rose out of manners awkward, uncertain what they were rising for. Please, sit. My husband is right. I'm no good in important rooms, and I'd hate to spoil this one. She turned to Nathaniel. Sir. And she curtsied to him. Low. Slow. Both hands on her skirts, her chin down, held a half-second longer than any wife has ever held a curtsy to her own husband. The deep, formal, flawless curtsy a hired girl gives a man who pays her wages. The room went dead silent. Nathaniel Carter laughed. That's what I mean, gentlemen. Manners in her bones. Good night, Nathaniel. Good night. He never looked up. Not once. She stood there 3 full breaths, waiting to see if he would, and he did not. And then she walked out of the dining room of the house she had run for 11 years and did not look back at any of it. Behind her, the talk started again, a little too loud, a little too fast, the way men talk when they've all seen the same thing happen and have decided together not to have seen it. In the kitchen, Hattie was up to her elbows in the second pudding. Ma'am, you want your plate kept? No. You didn't eat. I'm not hungry, Hattie. Hattie turned. She was 61 years old and had cooked in that house since Nathaniel's mother ran it, and she looked at Abigail's face for maybe 2 seconds before she set the bowl down. What did he say? Nothing he hasn't thought for years. Mrs. Carter, send Ruth to bed when the last of them go. She's been on her feet since 4. Abigail took the ledger from the shelf by the door, the one she kept the household accounts in, and set it square in the middle of the work table where it could not be missed. And Hattie, the Miller boy's fever. Someone should look in on him tomorrow. You always look in on him. Yes, Abigail said. I always do. She went up the back stairs. In the dining room, Thomas Reed caught Nathaniel's arm on the way to the porch for tobacco. That was hard, Nate. What was... You know what? Nathaniel pulled his arm back easy, unbothered. It was a joke, Tom. It was a joke about your wife in front of Ames, who's been trying to get a rise out of her since he sat down. Then he got one out of me instead. She ought to thank me. She curtsied to you. She has beautiful manners. Thomas stood there in the dark of the porch with his pipe unlit and looked at his oldest friend, and something cold went through him. Nathaniel, do you hear yourself? I hear a man who's had my brandy telling me how to talk to my own wife. All right. She's not unhappy, Tom. She's never once said she was unhappy. Thomas struck his match. No, he said. I don't suppose she has. Upstairs, Abigail Carter unhooked the wedding necklace from her throat. It was her mother-in-law's heavy gold, a stone the color of weak tea, given to her on her wedding morning by a woman who had told her in the same breath, don't expect the Carter men to say things out loud. She had worn it every day for 11 years. It had left a faint mark on her collarbone, a thin, pale line where the sun never got. She laid it in its box, closed the lid, set the box in the center of the dresser where the morning light would hit it. Then she sat down and got out paper. She did not cry. She had thought she might. She'd half expected the crying to come up out of her the second the door shut, and it didn't. And after a minute, she understood why there was nothing left in her to grieve with. Grief takes hope. Grief is what you feel when something is being taken. Nothing had been taken tonight. Tonight she had simply been told the truth by a man too comfortable to lie anymore. She wrote for a little over an hour. She wrote 3 pages and burned 2 of them in the candle flame because they were angry, and she would not leave anger in that house. Anger would have given him something to argue with. Anger he could have answered. He was good at answering. What she left him, he could not answer. Then she packed. 1 trunk. Not the fine one, the old one. The one she'd brought from her father's farm when she was 19 with the initials AW still burned into the lid because nobody had ever bothered to change them to AC. 2 dresses, both gray. Her mother's Bible. Her seed notebooks, 4 of them tied with twine. A tin of chamomile. Her good shears. The letters her father had written her. Nothing else. Not the pearl earrings. Not the silver-handled brush. Not the housekeeping money in the tea caddy, though it was hers by every right and custom, and she counted it twice and put every coin back. She had $11.40 of her own saved out of egg money over 4 years, and she put that in her pocket, and that was all she took out of Nathaniel Carter's house. At 3 in the morning, she went down and woke Eli in the stable. "Ma'am." He came up off the straw with his hair standing sideways. "Ma'am, is it the mare, is she?" "The mare's fine. I need the cart. Now. Now." He was 17. He looked at the trunk sitting by the stable door and did not understand it, and then he understood it, and his face changed. "Mrs. Carter." "Hitch the cart, Eli." "Where am I taking you?" "The crossroads at Bower's Mill. There's a stage north at first light." "Mrs. Carter, if Mr. Carter wakes and finds—" "He won't wake." She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse. "He never wakes before 7. In 11 years, Eli, he has never once come down to breakfast before 7. The boy stood there holding the harness. "Ma'am, is he sending you off?" And that of all things was what nearly broke her. That the stable boy's first thought was that she'd been put out. That in this house a woman leaving was so unthinkable that being discarded was the likelier story. "No," Abigail said. "No, Eli, I'm going." They rode out under stars with the cartwheels loud on the packed dirt, and neither of them talking for the first mile. The summer air was thick and smelled of cut hay, and somewhere off to the left, the Miller place had a lamp burning, which meant the boy's fever hadn't broken. "Eli." "Ma'am." "The Millers. Tell Hattie the fever's still on him. Tell her to take the bark tea and to sit with the mother, not just the child. The mother's the one who'll come apart." "Yes, ma'am." "And the Westfield wants cutting inside of 9 days, or it'll lodge in the first hard rain." "I'll tell the overseer." "Tell him twice. He doesn't listen the first time." Eli wiped his face with the back of his wrist. "Ma'am, who's going to tell him after that?" Abigail looked out at the dark. "I don't know," she said. At the crossroads, he set her trunk down in the wet grass and stood there miserable in the pre-dawn gray. "Mrs. Carter, could I say a thing and not be whipped for it?" "Say it." "You paid my mother's rent." His voice cracked open. "Winter of 15. She never told nobody but me. Man came for the money, and it was already paid, and she asked who, and they said a lady come in a plain gray dress and wouldn't give a name." Abigail didn't answer. "That was you. Go home, Eli." "It was you, ma'am." "Go home." He got up on the cart. He turned it. Then he stopped and looked back at her standing alone in the grass at 4 in the morning with one trunk and $11. "Ma'am, I hope wherever you're going, they know what they got." She smiled at him, the first real one in a long while. "That's a fine thing to say. Go on now." Nathaniel Carter woke at 7 minutes past 7 and knew something was wrong before he knew what. The house was cold. Not cold. It was July. Nothing was cold, but the hearth was cold. And in 11 years, the kitchen hearth in that house had never once been dark when he came down. There was no coffee. There was no bread put out. There was no small stack of the morning's business set beside his plate, sorted the urgent things on top, the way it had appeared every morning of his adult life, like weather. "Abigail." Nothing. He went down the hall in his shirt sleeves. "Hattie. Where's my wife?" Hattie was standing at the work table with her hands flat on the ledger, and had plainly been standing there some while. "She's not here, sir." "Not here where?" "Not in the house." "Then she's at the barns. Send Ruth." Ruth already went, and to the drying sheds and the spring house and down to the Miller place. Hattie's voice was perfectly level, and that levelness was the first thing that frightened him. "She's not on the property, Mr. Carter." "That's absurd." "Yes, sir." He stood in his own kitchen, and something began working in him that he had no name for, because he'd never had cause to name it. "Eli," he said. "Get Eli." "Eli's been up since 3. "What?" Hattie lifted her chin. "He took the cart out at 3 in the morning, sir, and came back alone." Nathaniel went up the stairs 2 at a time. The room was made. The bed turned down and squared, the curtains drawn back. The basin emptied the room of a woman who had cleaned up after herself before leaving it, and that detail would come back to him for years at odd hours and take his breath. The necklace box sat square in the center of the dresser. Beside it, one folded sheet of paper with his name on it in her small, plain, careful hand. He opened it standing up. My husband. For 11 years, I have worked beside you. I have kept your accounts and your seasons. I have sat with your workers' wives through their births and their burials. I have paid your debts before they became gossip and settled your quarrels before they became lawsuits. When your father died, I laid him out because you could not stand to be in the room. You have never asked me for any of it, and I have never asked you to notice. Last night you told a table full of men what I am. I want you to know I am not leaving because you were cruel. You have never been cruel, Nathaniel. Cruelty at least requires that a man look at a person long enough to aim. I am leaving because I have finally understood a thing I cannot ununderstand. A person can bear being forgotten. It is survivable. Women survive it every day all over this county, and they go on setting the table. But no one can spend an entire life invisible and still be able to find herself at the end of it. I looked for myself last night, sir, and I could not find where I had been put. I have taken nothing that was yours. The housekeeping money is in the caddy counted. Your mother's necklace is in its box. The account ledger is on Hattie's table. The current page is the 12th. Mr. Doggett has been shorting the corn weight since April. I have marked it, but I never told you, because you do not like to be told things. Do not look for me to punish me. Do not look for me to bring me back. If you must think of me at all, think of this: I did not stop loving you in a moment. I stopped loving you in inches over years in rooms where you were sitting. Abigail Nathaniel Carter read it twice. Then he laughed. It came out of him short and hard one breath, and he folded the paper and put it in his waistcoat pocket and went down the stairs. Hattie, coffee. Sir. Coffee, please. He sat at the long table alone with the chairs still pushed out from the night before and drank his coffee and looked at nothing. She'd gone to her father's. Obviously. That was the whole of it. Samuel Whitmore's place at 9 Mile, a 2-hour ride, and she'd sit there a day or two and be embarrassed. And Samuel would send her back with a sack of peaches and an apology, and this would be a thing they never mentioned again. Like the winter she asked him to take her to Richmond, and he forgot. Thomas Reed rode in before noon. She's gone, Nathaniel said before Thomas was off the horse. I heard from Ames's driver. It's already in town, Nate. Then it's in town. What are you going to do? Nothing. Nathaniel spread his hands. She'll be back Thursday. Will she? She has $11, Tom. She has no horse, no letter of credit, no property in her name, and a father who farms 40 acres of rock. Where exactly is she going to go? Thomas looked at him a long moment. That's your answer, that she can't afford to leave you. That's my answer, that she'll be back Thursday. Nate. Thomas took his hat off, which he only did when he meant something. I've known you since we were 9 years old. So I'm going to say this once, and then I'll never say it again. Last night I watched a woman get told she was furniture by the man she married in front of 11 men, and I watched her curtsy for it. And I'm telling you plain, I don't think you've got any idea at all what just walked off this place. She kept the house. She is the house. Get off my land, Tom. All right? He rode to 9 Mile that afternoon anyway. He told himself it was to bring her home before the talk got worse. Samuel Whitmore was in the yard splitting stove wood in his shirt sleeves at 55 years old, and he did not put down the maul when Nathaniel dismounted. Samuel. Magistrate. Is she here? Whitmore set another round on the block. You come all this way to ask me that. Is my wife here? The maul came down. The wood cracked and fell apart. No. Then where is she? Now that's an interesting question. Whitmore straightened, and his eyes were his daughter's eyes exactly, and Nathaniel had never once in 11 years noticed that until this moment. You've been married to my girl 11 years, and you've come to me to find out where she'd go. She's your daughter. She was my daughter first. Yes. Whitmore wiped his hands on his thighs. Let me ask you something, son. Her mother's name. What? Her mother's name, my wife's. Dead 9 years now. What was her name? Nathaniel stood in the yard. He knew it. He absolutely knew it. It started with an M. It was you don't know it, Whitmore said. I've had a long night. Her name was Ruth Ann. My Abigail put her in the ground and then went home and cooked your supper the same evening because you had Judge Peyton coming. Whitmore picked up his maul again. You get on home now, Nathaniel. If she's here. She ain't here. And I'll tell you, honest magistrate, if she was, I wouldn't hand her over, and there ain't a court in this state fool enough to make me since you're the court. He set the next round up. Go on home. She'll come back. Samuel Whitmore looked at him with something that wasn't even anger. It was worse than anger. It was pity. Boy, he said, you don't know what you're talking about. My girl don't slam doors. She never has, not one time in 30 years. She just closes them real quiet and don't come back through. Nathaniel Carter rode home in the last of the light with his shirt stuck to his back and the letter in his pocket. The house was standing where it always stood. 12 rooms, 4 chimneys, the finest brick house between Bowling Green and the river, and every window of it dark except the kitchen. He came up the front steps and stopped with his hand on the door. He didn't know why he stopped. There was no reason. It was his house. He'd been walking through that door since he was born. He went in and stood in the front hall. Abigail, he said. The word went up the stairs and into the empty rooms and came back to him, and nothing else came back with it. Nathaniel Carter stood in the dark of his own hallway, a rich man, a magistrate, a man who had never in his life asked for anything twice and said his wife's name into a house that had stopped answering. The coffee went cold in front of him because Hattie never came to take the cup. That was the first thing that was different, and it was such a small thing that Nathaniel didn't understand for a full day what it meant. Hattie had taken his cup every morning for 31 years. She took it without being asked because Abigail had told her back in 1806 that Mr. Carter thinks better when the table's clear. Nobody had told Hattie to stop. Hattie had simply stopped, and she wasn't going to explain it. And when he finally carried the cup into the kitchen himself on Wednesday, she looked at it in his hand like it was a dead bird. You can set it down, sir. Where? Anywhere you like. It's your house. He set it down. Hattie, I need the accounts. They're on the table where she left them. I need them explained. Then you'll need somebody that can read them. She turned back to the stove. That ain't me. By Thursday, the wheels were coming off, and no one in that house could tell him which wheel had gone first. It started with the wagon. 2 wagons of new-cut oak staves came up the lane at 7 in the morning, and the driver wanted a signature and a payment. And Nathaniel came out on the steps and asked what the staves were for, and the driver, a big freckled man out of Port Royal, looked at him like he'd asked what the sun was for. Barrels, sir. For what? For your apples, sir. A pause. Mrs. Carter orders them the 3rd week of July, every year. 10-year running near enough. How much do I owe you? She always pays the first half in July and the rest at pressing. How much is the first half? The man shifted. You want me to tell you what your own wife pays me? I want a number. $42. Nathaniel paid it out of his own pocketbook and stood there afterward with the receipt in his hand, and the strangest sensation came over him. Not shame, yet nothing so clean as shame. Just a kind of vertigo. The feeling of a man who has walked confidently across a floor and discovered halfway that the floor was never his. Then Doggett came. Doggett had been overseer at Carter's for 9 years, a narrow man with a soft voice, and he came into the office with his hat in both hands and condolences all over his face. Terrible business, Mr. Carter, terrible, and in this heat. The West Field wants cutting. Doggett blinked. Sir. Inside of 9 days, or it lodges in the first hard rain. Well, now I'd have said we had 2 weeks yet. You'd have said wrong. Nathaniel didn't know where the words were coming from, and then he did know, and it sat him back in his chair. He was quoting her. He'd heard her say it to Eli in the dark at 3 in the morning, second-hand, through a boy in a stable he'd been told about after the fact. 9 days, Mr. Doggett. Yes, sir. And bring me the corn weights. Doggett's face did something. It was very fast, And if Nathaniel Carter had not spent 11 years on a magistrate's bench, watching men be asked questions they didn't want, he would have missed it entirely. The corn weights, sir. April through July. I'd have to gather those up. You'll have them on this desk by 4 o'clock. They were on the desk by 4 o'clock, and they were beautiful. Neat columns, clean sums, not a smudge in the whole of it. Nathaniel sat with them for 2 hours and could find nothing wrong at all. And then, near dark, he went into the kitchen and took Abigail's household ledger off Hattie's table and turned to the 12th page. The current page is the 12th. Page 12 was the corn. It was in her hand, and it was in pencil, and it went back to the second week of April. She had written down the weight the wagons left with. She had written down the weight Doggett recorded. She had written down the difference. She had done it 41 times, and at the bottom in a hand so small, he had to take the candle closer. She had written the total 219 bushels, or thereabout $131, which I have made good out of the household, so it would not show. I will speak of it when there is a good time. Underneath that in different pencil on a different day. There has not been a good time. Nathaniel Carter put the ledger down and put both hands flat on the table and stayed like that a while. He rode out to Doggett's house at 9 that night and knocked on the door with the ledger under his arm and did not go inside. And what he said on the porch took less than a minute, and Doggett was off the property by sunrise Friday with his wagon and his wife and a written character that said only the dates of his employment and nothing else, because Abigail's note had said, "I will speak of it when there is a good time." And Nathaniel discovered standing on that porch that he was not able to be crueler than she would have been. It was the first decision of his life he made by asking what she'd have done. He did not notice that he'd done it. He would notice later. Friday the house lost its second wheel. Ruth came to him white-faced at noon with a folded paper. "Sir, the Ferris place." "What about it?" "The sheriff's men are out there." "For what?" "Rent, sir. Back rent on the tenancy." "Then they'll pay it, or they'll go." Ruth stood there. She was 19 years old and terrified of him, and she did not leave. "Say it." "Mrs. Carter pays it, sir." "What?" "She has since the spring of 15 when Mr. Ferris's arm got took in the mill. She pays the rent to your own agent, sir, out of the egg money and the butter money, so it comes to you looking regular, and Mr. Ferris don't know." Ruth's voice was shaking so hard the paper rattled. "Nobody knows but me because I carry it. And I didn't carry it this month because there wasn't nobody to give it to me." Nathaniel stared at her. "She pays my tenant's rent. To me." "Yes, sir." "With my money." "With the egg money, sir." Ruth lifted her chin, and for 1/2 second she looked so much like her mistress that it went through him like a nail. "She always said the eggs were hers." He rode to the Ferris place himself. He got there while the sheriff's man was still counting furniture in the yard, and Ferris was standing there with his one good arm around his wife, and there were 4 children on the step, and every one of them looked up and saw the magistrate of Caroline County come up the lane and understood that things were about to get worse. "Mr. Carter." Ferris's voice had nothing left in it. "Sir, I got half. I can get the rest by—" "Stop." "Sir, if you'd just—" "Mr. Ferris, be quiet." Nathaniel got down off the horse. He was not good at this. He had never once in his life done this. "There's been an error in my books. You're paid through the year." Ferris's wife made a sound. "Sir, you're paid through the year, and the tenancy's yours through the next, and I'll thank you to send your oldest up to the house Monday for the harvest wage." He got back on the horse because he could not stand there another second. "It was an error in my books." I was 50 yards down the lane when Ferris shouted after him, "Mr. Carter, sir." He turned in the saddle. "Is she all right?" Ferris was standing in the middle of the road. "Mrs. Carter, is she all right?" "They're saying in town, she's sir, is she all right?" And Nathaniel Carter, who had ruled that county from a bench for 6 years, could not answer a one-armed tenant farmer in the middle of a dirt road because he did not know. The talk had gotten out ahead of him the way talk does. By Saturday, it was in Bowling Green, and by Sunday it was in the church, and it had grown teeth on the way. Ames had told it first, and told it as a joke. Carter said the woman was furniture, and the furniture got up and walked, and men had laughed. The first 2 times they heard it and stopped laughing around the 4th when their wives got hold of it. Mrs. Peyton did not speak to him at the church door. She looked at him, took her husband's arm and went by, and the judge gave him a nod that was 6 inches shorter than the nod he'd given a week before. Thomas Reed found him at the horses afterward. "You look like hell." "Thank you." "You eating?" "Hattie cooks. I eat." Nathaniel worked at the girth strap. "Tom, when did she start paying the Ferris rent?" Thomas went still. "You found that. You knew. Everybody knew, Nate. That's what I'm trying to get through your skull." Thomas leaned against the rail. "I knew because Ferris cried on my shoulder at a barn raising 2 years ago. Judge Peyton knows because she came to him about the Will's widow. The Methodist minister knows because half his poor fund comes out of your dairy in a basket with no name on it. My own wife knows because Abigail sat with her 4 nights running when the twins had the croup and never once told you where she'd been because you'd have said she was making a spectacle. I never said that. You said it in 1813 about the Hollis funeral. I was standing there." Nathaniel's hand stopped on the strap. "There it is," Thomas said quietly. "You remember." "I remember." "Then here's the part you don't." Thomas straightened up. "The reason nobody ever told you, Nate, it wasn't loyalty to her. It was fear of you. Every soul on your place learned that if a thing came to your ear, it got a lecture attached to it, so they took it to her instead. You built that. 11 years, one look at a time. She didn't hide the county from you. The county hid from you, and she stood in the gap so you'd never have to know it." Nathaniel got up on the horse. "Where would she go, Tom?" "I don't know." "You've known her 11 years. So have you." That landed harder than anything Samuel Whitmore had said in his yard. He went home and began methodically the way he did everything to take his own house apart, looking for his wife. He started in her room, then the linen press, then the still room, the dairy office, the seed cellar. He found things. He found 4 notebooks tied in twine that were only the copies the originals had gone with her, and the copies were enough to keep him up until 3 in the morning. Crop rotations going back to 1809 in her hand-sketched fields, soil notes the exact dates of every frost in 11 years. He found a page headed "Losses and Their Causes," where she had written down every failure on that place for a decade, and beside each one in a column, what she had learned. He found that in 1812, the year he had told the whole county he'd read the weather right, she had moved the tobacco beds 40 rods south on her own judgment and never mentioned it. He found a bundle of letters from a seed house in Philadelphia addressed to A. Carter Esq, because they had assumed for 6 years that they were corresponding with a man. And in a tin at the back of the still room under the chamomile, he found the papers. He knew what they were before he had them all the way out of the tin, because he recognized his own signature on the second sheet and the date and the amount. The autumn of 1814. He had never told anyone about the autumn of 1814. He had endorsed a note for a man named Prewitt on a shipping venture in Baltimore out of vanity, because Prewitt was a Richmond man, and Nathaniel had wanted Richmond men to think him bold. The venture went to the bottom off Cape Charles with everything in it. He had come home in November, owing $4,100 that he did not have against land. He could not sell fast enough in a year. The bank was calling everything, and he had sat in that office for 2 days, deciding which fields to lose, and then it had gone away. That was how he had always thought of it, in exactly those words, for 6 years. It went away. Prewitt's people must have made it good. The bank must have carried it. He had asked once of a clerk in a hallway and gotten a vague answer, and he had not asked twice because a man does not go looking under a piece of good luck. The papers in the tin were a deed of sale, 91 acres on the Mattapony, timber and bottomland, the marriage portion. Samuel Whitmore had settled on his daughter in 1806, and the only thing on this earth that had ever been legally hers. Sold the 18th of December, 1814, to a Fredericksburg man for $4,200. Pinned to it, the bank's discharge of the note. Pinned to that one line in her handwriting on a scrap no bigger than a playing card, he would not have survived being pitied. Let him think it went away. Nathaniel Carter sat down on the still room floor. I was 36 years old, and he sat down on a stone floor in the dark with a tin in his lap, and what came out of him was not weeping. Not at first, it was a sound with no shape to it. The sound of a man who has just learned that the sentence he said to Thomas Reed on the steps of his own house, "She has no property in her name, where exactly is she going to go?" was not a fact about his wife. It was a description of what he had cost her. She had gone into this world Tuesday morning with $11 in her pocket because 6 years ago she had spent her only land keeping his name clean and had let him spend 6 years believing he'd been lucky. He found Hattie in the kitchen at 4 in the morning. He was still holding the tin. "You knew about this." Hattie looked at it. "I know what it is." 91 acres. "I know." "Say something." "What do you want me to say?" "Mr. Carter." Hattie sat down slowly, which she had never once done in his presence. "You want me to tell you she cried? She didn't. She come in this kitchen the night she signed it and she made bread. 4 loaves. She said, 'Hattie, I want my hands in something.'" Hattie's mouth went hard. "And then she went upstairs and she asked me to loosen her stays because she couldn't get breath, and I done it, and she stood there holding the bedpost, and she said one thing to me. You want to know what it was?" "Yes." She said now he'll never have to know he was foolish. Hattie shook her head. "That was the whole of it. Not a word about the land. Her mama's woods, sir. She was born in a house on that land." Nathaniel put his hand over his mouth. "There's a thing else," Hattie said. "I don't want it. You're going to have it anyway because there's nobody left in this house that's willing to protect you." Hattie stood up. "Come here." She took him up the back stairs. She took him to the little room at the end of the hall that had a cedar chest in it and a broken chair, and she opened the cedar chest, and inside was a trunk strap, a folded gray dress, a pair of shoes wrapped in paper, and a sewing kit. "That's been sitting there 3 years." "What is it?" "That's her leaving." Hattie shut the lid. "She packed that in the spring of 1815, sir, after the baby." The floor went out from under him a second time in one night. "After the what?" Hattie stopped with her hand on the chest. "Hattie, you don't know that either." It wasn't a question. Hattie put her hand up over her face for a moment, and when she took it down, she looked older by 10 years. "Lord in heaven, Lord, I thought at least I always thought you knew and just didn't say. Everybody in this house thought that. Say it plain. April 1815. You were in Richmond 11 days on the turnpike business." Hattie's voice did not rise. It never rose. "She lost a child at 4 months, and she done it in the linen closet at the end of that hall, because Ruth was in the room across, and she didn't want the girl frightened. I found her at dawn. She wouldn't have the doctor, because the doctor would have wrote to you, and you'd have had to come home, and she said—" Hattie had to stop. "She said he'll be back Thursday, and it'll be over by then, and it'll only make him uncomfortable." Nathaniel put out a hand and found the wall. "She was up in 4 days. She had the cooper here on the 5th about the barrels. And she packed that trunk, and it sat in this room 3 years, and every so often she'd come in and stand and look at it, and then she'd go back down and put supper on your table." Hattie shut the door behind them. "You want to know why she stayed 3 more years with that trunk packed, Mr. Carter?" "No. Because you had a bad winter in 16, and she said a man shouldn't be left in a bad winter." Hattie went past him toward the stairs. "She'd have stayed till she died. All you had to do was not say it out loud in front of 11 men. He did not sleep. He did not sleep Sunday either. Monday, he began to look for her in earnest, and Monday was when he found out what he actually was in that county, because he had to ask people for help. He asked the stage agent at Bower's Mill, who remembered a lady with 1 trunk and said she'd bought a seat north as far as the Rappahannock, and then asked very politely what the fare would be for a farther town, and had been told, and had said thank you, and taken the shorter ticket. "How much shorter?" "She had $11 and change, sir. She counted it out on my counter. She said she'd need to keep back enough for a month's board wherever she landed." "Which town?" "That's the thing. She didn't name one." The agent scratched his neck. "She asked me a question I never had before." "What question?" "She asked me which towns on the northern line had no school." He asked the innkeeper at the Rappahannock crossing, who remembered nothing, and the ferryman who remembered a gray dress and no face. He asked at 3 churches. He went to Fredericksburg and stood in a room full of men who had known him for years and had all heard the story, and asked each of them if a woman had come inquiring after work, and watched every one of them enjoy it a little. A woman of what description? Carter. 30 years of age, brown hair, gray dress. Well, now that's every woman in Virginia. She'd have been carrying a trunk with AW on the lid. AW. Whitmore, Nathaniel said, and heard himself say it, and had to put his hand on the back of a chair, because the initials had never been changed, and he had never once wondered why. And now he understood that for 11 years his wife had traveled the world with her father's name on her only possession, because no one, not one person, not him, not anyone had thought it was worth the 20 cents to burn a C into that lid. He rode it to 9 Mile again on Wednesday. Samuel Whitmore was in the same yard. Back again, magistrate. I know about the land. The mall stopped in the air. Then it came down. Do you? 91 acres. December of 14. $4,200. Nathaniel stayed on the horse because he did not think his legs would hold him in that yard. Did you know? I found out in 16. Man come hunting timber rights and asked me about my neighbor. Whitmore set another roundup. That was a bad day at this house. You never said a word to me. She asked me not to. He split the round. She come out here and stood right where your horse is standing and asked me as a favor for the rest of my life never to let you know she'd done it. Said it'd break something in you that wouldn't mend. And you agreed to that. I did not. Whitmore turned around. I said, Abby, that man is going to eat you a spoonful at a time and call it a marriage. And she said, he stopped. Say it. She said, Daddy, he's not unkind. He's just never once had to look at me. Nobody ever made him. Whitmore's jaw worked. And then she went home and cooked your supper. Nathaniel got down off the horse. His legs held. He stood in the dirt in front of a man in shirt sleeves who farmed 40 acres of rock, and he took his hat off. Mr. Whitmore, I'm asking you for help. That's the first time you ever called me that. I know it. You've had that hat on your head in my yard 11 years. I know it. Samuel Whitmore looked at him for a long, long moment. He looked at him the way a man looks at a horse he's thinking of shooting. I don't know where she is, he said finally. That's God's truth, and you can search this house. But I'll tell you something for free, and then you can get off my land again. He leaned the maul against the block. You're looking in the wrong direction. You've been asking every man of business between here and Fredericksburg. Ain't a one of them ever mattered a nickel to her. Then who? Ask the women's son. He went home, and for the first time in his life Nathaniel Carter asked the women. He asked Hattie, who told him to ask Ruth. He asked Ruth, who cried, and then told him to ask the Miller woman. He rode to the Millers on Thursday, and he learned 2 things there, and the first one nearly put him on the ground. The Miller boy had died on Sunday. Fever turned, the mother said. She said it flatly, holding the door half shut with 2 other children behind her skirt. Tuesday night it was up, and Wednesday it was up, and Sunday morning it went out of him. I'm sorry. Are you? Not a question either. Mrs. Miller. She'd have come. The woman's voice cracked straight down the middle. 4 years she come. Every fever in this house. Every one of my babies she come. And she sat with me all night. And she never once brought a basket and made me thank her for it. She just come and sat. And I looked up that road Wednesday night, mister. And I looked up it Thursday night, and there wasn't nobody on it. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. You go on home. Mrs. Miller, please. Anything she said. Any place she ever spoke of. And that was the second thing he learned, because the woman stood there hating him and told him anyway because she was better than he was. She talked about a school. What school? A school that wanted her. Mrs. Miller shifted the baby on her hip. 2-3 years back she was sitting right on that step with my nan asleep on her, and she was tired, and she said there was a letter come to her once from a place up north wanting a woman to teach, and she'd wrote back, no. The woman's mouth twisted. I asked her why, and she said something I never forgot. What did she say? She said because he'd not have noticed I was gone until the accounts came due in October. Mrs. Miller stepped back inside. And then she laughed, mister. That's the part. She laughed like it was a funny thing. He tore the house Thursday night looking for a letter he wasn't sure existed. I went through her room again, the still room again, the seed cellar, the cedar chest. He went through the 4 notebooks page by page with a candle, and it was in the 4th one folded into the back cover, so flat it had gone the color of the paper around it, and he almost turned past it twice. It was dated the 9th of March, 1814. It was from a Reverend Josiah Pike of the Willow Creek Settlement in the northern part of the state, and it was very short and very plain. It said that the subscribers of that place had raised money for a school and had no one to keep it. It said that a Philadelphia seed house had given them her name, A. Carter-esque, and that they had been surprised and then not sorry to learn the correspondent was a lady on account of the letters being the most sensible on the subject of soil the Reverend had ever read. It said the position paid $80 a year and a room. It said they would hold it open until the summer, and underneath in her small, careful hand was her answer. Not the answer she'd sent. The answer she'd written first and kept. Reverend Pike, I have read your letter 9 times in 3 days, which tells me more about my situation than I care to write down. I am obliged to decline. My husband is in some difficulty this year, which he does not know I know of, and it would be a poor thing to leave a man in the middle of a hard season. Perhaps in a year or 2, when he is steady again. AC. Under that in pencil, in a hand grown fainter, the way a person writes when they come back to a page years later, 1815, not this year. 1816, not this year. 1817, nothing after it. Just the dash and the white paper going on. Nathaniel Carter sat with that letter until the candle burned down into the dish and went out, and he did not get up to light another one. He sat in the dark, holding a piece of paper that told him his wife had been offered a door in 1814 and had stood in front of it for 3 years with her hand on the latch and had closed it every single year for him. Because he was in difficulty. Because it was a hard season. Because he wouldn't be steady yet. How was steady now? That was the joke of it, and he could hear her laughing on the miller's step, that same laugh at that same kind of joke. He was rich and steady and respected, and he had 400 acres of wheat standing straight up in the wind. And the only reason she had finally walked out of his house was that he had gotten so comfortable he'd said the truth out loud with a glass in his hand. She had not left him because things got bad. She had left him because things got good and nothing changed. He was in the stable at 4 in the morning saddling his own horse when Hattie came out with a lantern in her nightclothes. Where are you going? North. North where? A settlement called Willow Creek. Hattie held the lantern up. You know what you're going to say when you get there? No. That's the first sensible thing you've said in a week. She set the lantern on the rail. Mr. Carter, can I say a thing to you as a woman that's known you since you was in short pants and not as a cook? Say it. If you go up there to fetch her, you'll come back alone, and you'll deserve to. Hattie's face was very steady in the lantern light. That woman ain't lost. Ain't nobody stole her. She went. And a woman that walks out of a brick house with $11 because she'd rather be nobody someplace than furniture in her own home. So that woman has already had the hardest conversation of her life, and she had it by herself, and you weren't in the room. Nathaniel pulled the girth strap tight. Then what do I do? I don't know. Hattie picked the lantern back up. But you might start by finding out whether she wants to be found. That's a different errand than the one you're packing for. He rode out of the yard before the sun was up north on a road he had never taken in his life, toward a settlement he had never heard of, to find a woman who had been standing beside him for 11 years, and he made it 11 miles before he had to pull the horse up at the side of the road, because he could not see, because it had finally at last come all the way up out of him. And Nathaniel Carter sat in the dirt at the edge of the Fredericksburg Road, with his hat off and his forehead on his knees, sobbing like a child for a woman he had never once looked at, and a son he had never known he lost, and 91 acres of somebody else's mother's woods. He got to Willow Creek on the 4th day, with the horse gone lame at the hock and his coat over his arm, and he stopped the first man he saw and asked for Mrs. Carter. Who? Carter. Abigail Carter. The man chewed on it. Ain't no Carters here. She'd have come in June, alone, one trunk. Mister, I've been here 9 years, and I know every soul in this settlement by their supper. He went back to his wagon. Ain't no Carters. Nathaniel stood in the road with that. He asked 3 more people. A woman hanging wash said no. A boy said no. The smith said no twice and went back to his fire, and Nathaniel had gotten as far as the notion that Reverend Pike's letter was 3 years dead, and she had never come here at all. That she was in Baltimore or Philadelphia, or in the ground somewhere off a road. Nobody watched when a girl of about 11 came out of the smith's yard behind him wiping her hands. Mister, you mean Miss Whitmore? He turned around slow. Say that again. Miss Whitmore. The girl looked at him like he was simple. She keeps the school. She's got brown hair, and she talks quiet, and she don't let you say ain't. Whitmore. Yes, sir? Not Carter. I never heard nobody call her that. The girl squinted at him. You her people. He opened his mouth and found there was no honest answer in it. He was her husband. He had been her husband for 11 years and had put a ring on her and a house around her and a name over both. And she had walked 90 miles north and set the name down in the road like a coat she was done carrying. I knew her father, he said. The girl pointed him at a low building past the mill race and ran off, and Nathaniel Carter stood there holding his hat and understood that he had just lied about who he was to a child, because the truth was worse. Reverend Josiah Pike was 58 years old and built like a fence post, and he met Nathaniel at the door of the meeting house and did not invite him in. You're asking after our schoolmistress? I am. On what business? Family business. She hasn't got family here. Pike's eyes went over him, the coat, the boots, the horse standing lame in the road, and Nathaniel could see the man doing arithmetic and coming out with a number he didn't like. Mister, I'll be plain with you because I'm too old to be otherwise. That woman came into this settlement in June with a trunk and $11, and she asked me for the position I offered her 3 years ago, and when I asked her was she at liberty to take it, which is a proper question to ask a woman of 30. She said yes, that's all she said. Not a word about a husband, not a word about a father, not a word about where she come from or what she come out of. Did you ask? I did not. Why not? Because when a grown woman shows up with one trunk and don't offer a man of sense, don't ask. Pike folded his arms. And I'd thank you to stand there a minute and consider why a woman does that. Go on, take your time. I've got all afternoon. Nathaniel stood there. What's your name, sir? Pike said. And he heard himself say Carter, and watched the Reverend's face change not to surprise, to something much worse, to recognition. Ah, Pike said. You know the name. I know the name off a letter I wrote in 1814 to a person I thought was a man. Pike's mouth was a line. And I know that in 11 weeks that woman has not said your name one time, not once. And I want you to understand, magistrate, because I've heard by now what you are, that she didn't have to say it. Everybody in this settlement knows there was a man. You can tell. It comes off some women like smoke. Where is she? In that building teaching 19 children. You'd like? Pike stepped down off the stoop. Sir, I don't know you. I know she's the best thing that's happened to this place in 9 years, and I know she teaches those children reading in the morning, and figures after dinner and soil in the afternoon. And half the men here have started listening to a woman about their own fields, which for Willow Creek is a miracle on the order of the loaves. He put his hat on. School lets at 4. You'll wait for 4. Reverend, 4 o'clock, and you'll wait out here in the road where she can see you coming and not in some doorway where she can't. That's how it's going to go. He waited 3 hours and 10 minutes. He could hear her. That was the thing that took his legs out from under him, standing in a road in a settlement he'd never heard of. A week ago, he could hear his wife's voice through an open window, and it was a voice he did not know. Not the pitch of it, the use of it. She was talking to a room full of children the way a person talks who expects to be listened to. And somewhere in the last 11 years, Nathaniel Carter had stopped hearing that from her entirely, and he had not noticed it. Stopped the way a man doesn't notice a clock until it quits. At one point, the children laughed, all of them at once. At another point, she said, No, Caleb, take your time. Nobody in this room is in a hurry. And something in Nathaniel's chest came apart, because he knew for a fact she had never in her life said that to him. And he had never once given her a reason to think she could. At 4 they came out in a flood, and went by him and around him. Then she came out. She had a slate under her arm, and her sleeves pushed up, and her hair pinned any old way, and she was thinner than she had been in July, and she was standing in the sun without a bonnet like a farm girl, and she saw him and stopped. She did not gasp. She did not drop the slate. She looked at him for perhaps 5 seconds. Then she said, "You're thinner." "Abigail, how is Hattie's hip?" He couldn't answer. "Did the Westfield get cut?" "It got cut." "Before the rain?" 2 days before." "Good." She shifted the slate. "Then you didn't lose it." And that was the whole of her greeting to the man she had been married to for 11 years. 3 questions about a house she had walked out of, asked in the tone of a woman asking after a neighbor's cow, and Nathaniel stood there and would have given the entire 400 acres for her to have screamed at him. "Can we talk?" "We're talking." "Somewhere else." "There isn't anywhere else, Nathaniel. This is a settlement of 11 families and a mill." She started walking, and he fell in beside her, and it was the first time in years they had walked anywhere at the same speed. "Say what you came to say." "I came to bring you home." "No." "Abigail, you asked to talk, and then you said the one sentence that ends it. That's not talking, that's an errand." She kept walking. "Try again." "I want you to come home." That's the same sentence with your feelings in it. He stopped in the road. "What do you want me to say?" She stopped too. She turned around, and for the first time there was something under the calm, and it was so old and so tired that it frightened him. "I want you to say what you think you lost." "I lost my wife." "You lost a great many things, and you've had 11 weeks to sort them," Abigail said. "Which one brought you 90 miles? Be honest with me, because if you can't be honest in a road in a town where nobody knows your name, you can't be honest anywhere." He tried to say you. It would not come out because it would have been a lie, and he was standing in front of the one person alive who would know it. "The house doesn't run," he said. "There it is." "That's not what I—" "It's exactly what you meant, and I'm glad you said it, because now we can stop." She looked at him almost kindly, which was unbearable. "Nathaniel, you don't miss me. You miss the life I built around you. You miss waking up in a house that was warm without you asking why. You miss your accounts being right, and your workers being fed, and your name being clean in a county where you never once had to do the work of keeping it clean. That was me. All of it was me. And you never knew it was me. And now that it's gone, you've come looking for the thing that made it the way a man goes looking for a mill wheel that fell off. That is not—" "Then tell me my mother's name." He said, "Ruth Ann," instantly. Abigail's face did something then. It was very small, and it was gone in a second, and she turned away from him fast, and he understood he had just hurt her worse than any of it, because he had learned it 4 days ago from her father in a yard, and she knew exactly where he'd learned it and exactly how recently. "Well," she said, "you've been busy." "Abigail, don't. I know about the land." She stopped walking. She stood with her back to him a good while. "That was mine to do. It was 91 acres. It was mine to do, Nathaniel." She turned around. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? Not your business, not your debt, not your shame. Mine. The one thing on God's earth that belonged to me, and I spent it, and I chose to spend it, and I'd have died before I let you know, because I did not want to be married to a man who had to look at me across a table and see $4,000. You should have told me. Should I?" Her voice never rose. That was the worst of it, that it never rose. "And what would you have done, sir? Would you have thanked me in front of Judge Peyton? Would you have said, 'Gentlemen, my plain wife from plain people sold her mother's woods to keep me out of the papers'?" She shook her head. "You'd have hated me for it inside of 2 years. Men do. I've watched it happen to better men than you. I'll buy it back." He said it too fast, and he knew it was wrong before the end of the sentence, and he watched it land on her and do the opposite of everything he'd meant. "Of course you will," she said. "Abigail, of course you will. That's the only language you've got." She had gone white. "You have been in this town 11 minutes, and you have already found the price of me. 91 acres and a note from the Fredericksburg Bank, and then you're square, and then you can go home feeling like a decent man, and I can go back to your table and be plain and quiet and paid for. That's not— Do you know what I would have taken?" And now finally, her voice broke one word, and she put her hand over her mouth to stop it, and took it away again. "Do you want to know the actual price, Nathaniel? Because it was so cheap. It was so cheap, it's obscene. If one time in 11 years, you had come into a room and said, 'Abby, what do you think I would have handed you that land and the woods and my whole life, and never asked for a dime of it back?' That was the price. You could have paid it any Tuesday." He had no answer. There wasn't one. He stood in the road and took it. "Go home," she said. "No." "Go home, Nathaniel." "I'm not going home." "Then stay in the road." She started walking. "I've got copybooks to mark." She got 15 feet. "April of 1815, he said. She stopped like she'd been shot. She did not turn around. He watched his wife's shoulders come up and go rigid, and he watched her stand there in the middle of a road with a slate under her arm, and he wished with everything in him, honestly, completely, that he had not said it. "Who told you?" she said. "Hattie." Hattie had no right. She had every right. Everybody in that house had every right, and they'd have had it years ago if they hadn't been afraid of me. He came up behind her and stopped a few feet short. "Abigail, turn around." "No. Please." I said no. Her voice was steady, and it was steady the way a rope is steady with a weight on it. "You don't get to see my face for this." I'd have come home. And then she did turn around. "Would you?" "I would have come home in an hour. I would have— I wrote to you." The road went out from under him. "What?" "I wrote to you," Abigail said. "The morning of the second day when I could stand up. I wrote to you at the Eagle Tavern in Richmond, and I paid a man 40 cents out of the egg money to carry it because the post would have been 4 days. Her chin was up, and her eyes were dry, and there was something in her face he had never seen there in 11 years and never wanted to see again. "So don't you stand in this road and tell me what you would have done. You had the chance. You were given the chance in your hand, sir, by a man on a horse, and I know he put it in your hand because he came back and told me he did, and I gave him $1 he didn't ask for." Nathaniel could not breathe, because he remembered it. That was the thing. That was the thing that would follow him the rest of his natural life, and it arrived whole and complete and perfectly clear. The Eagle Tavern, the turnpike. Commissioners, a rider at the door in the middle of dinner. A letter in her hand, and Nathaniel Carter putting it into the inside pocket of his coat without opening it, because her letters were household matters, because they were always household matters, because in 9 years of marriage she had never once written him anything that could not wait until Thursday. He had carried it 4 days. He had come home on Thursday, and she had been up and dressed, and the house had been running, and there had been a cooper in the yard, about barrels, and he had hung the coat in the press, and never thought about it again. "You never opened it," she said. She was watching his face. "I can see you remembering. You never opened it." "Abigail, did you lose it?" "No." "Then where is it?" And Nathaniel Carter said in a voice he didn't recognize, "In the coat." She made a sound. It wasn't a word. Abigail, I never took it out of the coat. It's in the press. It's been in the press 3 years. It's— Stop. It's still sealed. Stop." She had both hands up. "Stop talking. Stop." She turned in a half circle in the road like a woman looking for a door in a field. 3 years. I have thought for 3 years that you read it, and came home Thursday and said nothing. 3 years, Nathaniel. I built my whole understanding of you on that. I decided what kind of man you were on that, and I was wrong, and it's worse. Do you hear me? It's worse. Cruel I could have cruel is at least a thing a man does on purpose. I know it. You didn't even bother to be cruel to me. You just had somewhere to be. I know it. What did you think it said? She came at him, then actually came at him, and her voice finally went up, and it cracked the whole settlement open. He saw the smith straighten in his yard, 50 yards off. What did you think your wife wrote you at 9 o'clock at night by a writer she paid for a recipe? A question about the drapes. I didn't think anything. No, she said. You didn't. That's exactly right. That's the truest thing you've ever said to me. And she walked away, and he did not follow her, because there was no version of that road where following her was anything but one more thing done to her. And Nathaniel Carter stood in the middle of Willow Creek in the dust with his hat in his hand, while every soul in that settlement watched him from a doorway or a window, not knowing who he was, knowing exactly what he was. He did not leave. That was the thing nobody expected, least of all him. He took a room at Delia Rusk's on the strength of $2 and a face she didn't trust. And the next morning, he was at the mill race at 6 o'clock, asking Amos Kern the smith if there was work. What kind of work? Any kind. Kern looked at his hands. You ain't done a day's work in your life. That's true. Huh. Kern spat. That's a strange thing for a man in a coat like that to admit out loud. I've had a strange month. He hauled stone. That was the first job, and it was the first honest one of his life, and it took him 90 minutes to understand that he was not going to be able to do it, and another 4 hours to do it anyway. His hands opened up on the second day. On the third day, Delia Rusk wrapped them without being asked and without comment, and on the fourth, Amos Kern stopped him at noon and said, Whoever she is, she ain't worth killing yourself. And Nathaniel said, She's worth considerably more than that. And Kern laughed for the first time and gave him a hunk of bread. He didn't tell them his name past Carter, and nobody in Willow Creek, but Pike had ever heard the name of a magistrate in Caroline County. And so for 11 days, Nathaniel Carter was a big quiet man with ruined hands who worked for his board and said thank you to everybody, and it was the first stretch of his life he had ever been liked for anything he actually did. He saw her every day and spoke to her on none of them. He learned things by watching which he had never once done. He learned she got to the school an hour before the children and swept it herself. He learned she gave half her dinner to the Kern girl 3 days running and made a joke of it so the child wouldn't know she was being fed. He learned that the boy named Caleb stammered so badly he had not spoken in the meeting house in 2 years, and that Abigail had him reading out loud to a horse on purpose every afternoon because the horse did not interrupt. On the 9th day, he heard her laugh. He had to stop walking. He stood on the road with 2 buckets and could not go on for a minute because he had been married to that laugh for 11 years and had heard it maybe 5 times, and here it was free going off in the middle of a schoolyard over some fool thing a 9-year-old had said. She had not been broken in his house. That was what he understood standing there with the buckets. He'd been telling himself a story where he had broken her because at least a broken thing can be mended by the man who broke it. But she had not been broken. She had been stored. The trouble came on the 12th day, and it came in a good coat with a leather case. Harlan Crabtree was a land agent out of Fredericksburg, and he stood in the meeting house with 11 subscribers and Reverend Pike, and read out that the note on the 2-acre schoolhouse lot given by the late Mr. Dodd's estate and carried 3 years by his heirs had been sold, and was now called, and would be settled in 40 days or the lot, and the improvements on it would be taken up. How much? Pike said. $640. The room came apart. $640 in the moon. There's a school on that lot, Pike said. Built by subscription. 19 children. There's a building on that lot, Reverend. The building goes with the land, that's the whole nature of it. Crabtree closed his case. 40 days. Nathaniel Carter was standing at the back of that room in a borrowed shirt with his hands wrapped, and he watched his wife. She didn't say anything. She stood against the wall with her arms folded, and she went through it. He could see her doing it, could see her running the arithmetic of 11 families and a mill and a subscription list. The same face she'd made across a table from him 1,000 times, about barrels and seed and a boy's fever, the face of a woman totaling up a thing and finding it short. She had that same look she'd had the night of the dinner. Water clearing. And Nathaniel understood 2 things at once. The first was that she was going to try to carry it herself. She was going to write letters and cut her own board and go without and hold that school up with her back, the way she had held up a brick house for 11 years, and nobody in this town would ever know it either, and in 3 years she'd be thinner still. The second thing was that he had $640 in a bank in Fredericksburg and could end it in an afternoon. He rode out that night without telling anybody. He was back on the third day, and it was done. He'd found Crabtree in Fredericksburg, paid the note in full, taken the discharge, and paid a further $80 for the man's silence and the estates, and he had done it. He told himself the entire ride home correctly, quietly, without his name on it, without her owing him, the way she'd have done it. High gave the discharge to Reverend Pike sealed, and said it came from a subscriber in Fredericksburg who wished no notice. Pike held the paper and looked at him a long time. A subscriber? Yes, sir. In Fredericksburg? Yes, sir. Said Pike. She was waiting for him at Delia Rusk's gate at dusk, and he knew from the doorway that it had gone entirely wrong because she was not calm. You paid it. Abigail, don't you dare say a subscriber to me. I've been doing this since I was 19, and I know a covered track when I see one. Her voice was low, and it was shaking, and she was furious in a way he had never once seen in 11 years of marriage. $640, Nathaniel. It's paid, that's all it is. It's paid and it's done, and nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows, she said. Say it one more time and listen to yourself say it. And he heard it. He heard it as it came out of his own mouth the third time, and the ground opened up under him for the fourth time in a month, and he stood in the gate of a boarding house in a settlement of 11 families and understood. Oh God, he said. There it is. That's what you did. Every day for 11 years. She was crying now, and she was so angry about the crying that she wiped it off with the back of her wrist like it was mud. The Ferris rent, the Miller doctor, the poor fund in a basket with no name on it, the land Nathaniel my mother's woods. Every single one of them done quietly, so nobody would have to look at me and feel a thing about it. And do you know what it got me? Abigail, it got me invisible. She hit the gatepost with the flat of her hand once. That's how it happens. Not all at once. You do the good thing in the dark, and you do it again, and you do it 1,000 times, and it works. It works. That's the horror of it. Everybody's fed and everybody's paid, and nobody ever once has to say your name out loud. And then one night, 11 years later, a man raises a glass at his own table and tells the county, "Your furniture," and he isn't even lying. He's just reporting what he was allowed to see. He couldn't stand up under it. He put his hand on the fence. And now you, she said. Now you've come 90 miles and done the exact same thing to me. You've paid for my school in secret so that nobody in this town will ever know that the man who called me plain in front of 11 men crawled up here and bought it back for me. You didn't do it so they'd be safe, sir. You did it so you wouldn't have to be seen doing it. That's not why. Isn't it? I thought about it. He made himself think about it. And that was new too, that he stood there in front of her and actually turned it over instead of answering. And Abigail saw him do it, and something in her face flickered. No, he said. It's why. She hadn't expected that. He watched her not expect it. It's exactly why, Nathaniel said. I've never in my life stood in a room and said a true thing about myself out loud. Not once. Not to Tom, not to your father, not to you. I'd rather spend $600 than say one sentence with my name attached to it in front of people who'd hear it. He took his hand off the fence. You've known that about me for 11 years, haven't you? Yes. How long did it take you? Abigail wiped her face again. About 4 months. Nathaniel laughed. It came out wrecked, and it wasn't a good sound, but it was real. 4 months. You're not complicated, Nathaniel. She almost smiled. She almost did. You're just very well built. He went to Reverend Pike that same night and asked him to call the subscribers. Now. Tomorrow. All of them. And whoever else will come. For what purpose? I'm going to give them a piece of information. Pike looked at him over the candle for a long moment. Son, he said, and it was the first time the man had called him anything but sir or mister or magistrate. I've buried 4 wives' husbands and married off 60 couples, and I've never yet seen a man talk his way back into a house he burned. I'm not trying to get back in the house. What are you trying to do? "Stand in the road where she can see me coming," Nathaniel said, "instead of in a doorway where she can't." Pike sat back. "Well," he said, "I did say that, didn't I?" They came at 10 the next morning, the 11 subscribers and Amos Kern and Delia Rusk and the miller and his sons, and about 30 other people who had heard something was happening and had nothing better to do, and Abigail Whitmore, who came in last and stood at the back wall with her arms folded exactly where he had stood 12 days before. Nathaniel Carter walked up to the front of a meeting house in a borrowed shirt with his hands wrapped in rags. "Most of you know me as the man hauling stone for Mr. Kern," he said. The room shifted. "That's not my name. My name is Nathaniel Carter. I'm a landowner in Caroline County, and I've sat as magistrate there 6 years. I've got 400 acres in wheat and 12 rooms and 4 chimneys, and I am by any measure this room would use a successful man." It went very quiet. On the 9th of July I gave a dinner. 11 men at my table, and a gentleman asked after my wife who was sitting at the far end of it, and I raised a glass, and I told those men. His voice went, and he stopped, and he made himself go on and say it in that room with her standing at the back of it. I told them that my wife was never meant for important rooms, that she was a plain woman from plain people, that she kept a house warm and quiet, and that a man doesn't need another voice at his table demanding to be heard. Somebody in the room said, "Oh Lord." "They laughed," Nathaniel said. "I let them, and she stood up and curtsied to me like a hired girl and left the room, and I never looked up, and she was gone by morning." Delia Rusk had her hand over her mouth. "Here's what I've learned since. She ran my estate, every account, every season, every crop rotation for 11 years in her own hand, in books I never opened. She paid a tenant's rent for 2 years out of her egg money, so I wouldn't evict a man with one arm. She sat up nights with sick children in 4 households in my county, and never told me because I'd have called it a spectacle, and I would have. In 1814 I put my name on a note out of vanity, and lost $4,000, and it went away, and I let it go away, and I never asked how." He had to stop again. "She sold the 91 acres her mother left her. That's how. She sold her mother's woods and paid my debt and hid the papers in a tin under the chamomile so I would never have to know I'd been a fool." Reverend Pike had taken his hat off and was holding it in both hands. "And in April of 1815, she lost a child in a linen closet by herself while I was in Richmond," Nathaniel said, "and she wrote to me that night and paid a writer 40 cents to carry it, and I put the letter in my coat and never opened it. It's still in my coat. It's been in a press in my house for 3 years." The room made a sound. "The reason I'm telling you all of this," he said, "is that yesterday I paid off the note on your schoolhouse. $640 in Fredericksburg, and I paid the agent 80 more to keep his mouth shut about it, and I gave the discharge to your reverend and told him it came from a subscriber who wished no notice." Amos Kern stood up. "Sit down, Amos," Pike said. "I'd sooner know why." "Sit down." "I did it in the dark," Nathaniel said, "because I'd rather buy a thing than be seen doing it. And a woman in this settlement told me last night that that's exactly how you make a person disappear. You do the good quietly enough long enough, and eventually nobody has to say your name at all." He looked up, and he looked at the back wall. "I made her disappear. It took me 11 years, and I never once raised my voice to her. I want the whole of this town to know it out loud, because she spent her entire life making sure nobody had to. Nobody moved. Her name is Abigail Whitmore," Nathaniel Carter said, "and I'm the man who called her plain." He came down, and there was no sound in that meeting house at all, and Abigail was already gone from the back wall out into the road walking fast, and Delia Rusk started after her, and Pike caught her arm and shook his head. She didn't come to the school the next morning. Pike took the children. She didn't come the morning after that either. On the 3rd morning, Nathaniel was at the mill race at 6 with the buckets, and she was standing there waiting for him, and her eyes were swollen, and she had her arms wrapped around herself, and she looked at him for a while before she said anything. "I'm not coming home." "I know." "Don't say I know like it's a strategy. It isn't." He set the buckets down. "Abigail, I've got no plan. I had one when I rode up here, and it was a bad one, and it lasted about 4 minutes. She nodded slowly. 12 people have said my name to me in 3 days, she said. In the road, at the mill. The Kern girl's mother came to my door and cried on me, and I didn't know what to do with my hands. Her voice wobbled, and she got it back. Nathaniel, I have never in my life been thanked for anything out loud. Not once. I didn't know it would feel like being skinned. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. That's the thing. She wiped her eye with her wrist. That's what I came to say. Don't be sorry, because sorry is another thing you'd be doing at me. All right. Don't ask me to come home. All right. Don't ask me anything about the estate or the accounts or Hattie's hip or what I'd do about the corn. All right. She stood there. Her chin was going. Ask me something else, Abigail said. And Nathaniel Carter stood at a mill race in a settlement of 11 families, with his hands wrapped in rags, and he did not ask her to come home, and he did not ask her to forgive him, and he did not ask her about a single acre of anything he owned. What was his name? He said. Her face broke. She got it out on the second try in a whisper with both hands pressed flat over her mouth. Samuel. She said it, and then she couldn't say anything else, and Nathaniel Carter did not reach for her because he understood finally, 11 years and 3 months too late, that reaching for a woman is not the same thing as being someone she can reach for. Samuel, he said. She nodded, both hands still over her mouth. After your father. He'd have been the only grandson. Her voice came apart on the word, and she let it. Daddy doesn't know. I never told him. I couldn't. How do you tell a man he lost something he never knew he had? I don't know. Neither did I, so I didn't. She wiped her face with her wrist. That's 4 years of not knowing what to do with my hands, Nathaniel. He stood there with the buckets at his feet. Go home, she said. Abigail. No, listen to me. Listen. She got her breath. You stood up in that meeting house and said true things in front of 30 people who don't know you and can't hurt you. That's not nothing. But it's cheap here. It cost you nothing here. It didn't feel cheap. I'm sure it didn't. She almost smiled. Go say it in Caroline County. To who? To every last one of them. Her chin came up. Say it to Colonel Ames. Say it to Judge Peyton and his wife, and to the men who laughed, and then go home and say it in your own yard to the people who work your land, who have been afraid of you since they were children. Say it where you'll be looked at for the rest of your life. She stepped back from him. Then I'll know. And then you'll come home. I didn't say that. Abigail, I said then I'll know. She turned and started up toward the school and got 4 steps and stopped without turning around. And Nathaniel, don't write to me about the accounts. Reverend Pike caught him at the road with the horse the next morning, and he was not gentle about it. You're leaving. I am. She send you? She did. Pike looked up the road toward the school. You know she swept that floor at 5 this morning instead of 6. Woman's up at all hours since you came. I'd call that a bad sign in most people, but in her, I believe it's just what thinking looks like. He put his hand on the horse's neck. You going to come back? Not unless she asks me to. Now that, said Pike, is the first thing you've done that I'd call married. He rode into his own yard 4 days later, and Hattie came out on the steps and looked at his hands and said nothing about them at all. There's a coat, Nathaniel said. I know what's in the press. Have you? 31 years in this house, Mr. Carter and I have never once gone into a man's pockets. He went up alone. The coat was the blue one, the good one, the one he'd worn to Richmond in April of 1815, because commissioners judged a man by his coat, and it hung there with 3 years of cedar on it, and the letter was exactly where he'd put it, in the inside breast, folded twice, sealed with a smear of household wax, because she hadn't had the good wax and hadn't gone downstairs to get it. He sat down on the floor of his own dressing room and broke the seal. Nathaniel the child came away last night. It was a boy far enough along to be certain of it, and I have seen to everything, and Hattie has been very good. I am not asking you to come. There is nothing to come for now, and the turnpike business is important to you. It will all be over by Thursday, and you will not have to see any of it. I only want one thing, and it is a small thing, and then I will not raise it again. I was going to name him Samuel for my father, Nobody else on this earth knows that. I would like it if somebody besides me had said it out loud. When you come home, if you can say his name one time. You needn't do it in front of me. You needn't tell me you did it. Only I would like it. Said somewhere in this house by somebody who isn't me, so that it happened to two people instead of one. Do not hurry. A. Hattie found him there an hour later and did not ask. Hattie? Yes, sir? Where is he? She sat down on the top stair slow on account of her hip. End of the kitchen garden. Under the pear. Is there a stone? There's a flat rock. She sat there herself the fifth day, when she could walk that far. Hattie's mouth trembled and steadied. She never let nobody go with her. Every spring she took the winter kill off that pear tree and pruned it and come back in and made breakfast. And I stood at that window 7 years and watched her do it. And you was at that table waiting on your coffee. I went out at dusk and found the flat rock, and he stood there a long while, and there was no one on the property to hear him, and he did not care if there had been. Samuel Carter, he said. He said it 4 times because he had 4 years to make up and no better arithmetic than that. And then he went inside and did not sleep. And at 6 the next morning, he had every soul on that place standing in his yard. 41 of them. Housefield Dairy Stable. Hattie at the front with her arms crossed. Ruth beside her. Eli at the back where the horses were holding his hat in both fists, like he expected to be blamed for something. Some of you have heard why my wife left this house, Nathaniel said. Nobody moved. All of you have heard. Let's not do that. He put his hands behind his back. I said a thing at my table on the 9th of July that I intend to say out here, so it's said correctly. I told 11 men that Mrs. Carter was a plain woman who kept a house warm and quiet, and that a man doesn't need another voice at his table. I said that about a woman who ran this entire place for 11 years while I took the credit for it in town. Ruth started crying. Hattie did not. Here's what else is true, and I want it said in front of everybody, so nobody has to whisper it in a barn anymore. Mr. Doggett was shorting the corn weight from April. She caught it in the 2nd week, and she covered it out of the household, so it wouldn't come to me, because she had learned that bringing me a problem got her a lecture. That's not her failing. That's mine, and I built it a look at a time over 11 years, and every one of you knows exactly what look I mean. A man in the back said low, "Yes, sir, we do." And somebody hissed at him, and Nathaniel said, "No, no, that's the last time anybody in this yard gets hissed at for saying a true thing to me." He told them about the Ferris rent. He told them about the 91 acres. He did not tell them about Samuel. That was hers, and there was one thing left in the world he was not going to spend. Now the changes, he said, and they start today, and they are not a mood. Wages went up 1/3 across the board, and were to be paid on the last day of the month, whether or not he was in the county. Hattie was to keep the household ledger, and Ruth was to learn to read well enough to keep it after her an hour every morning on the clock paid. Every family on the place got their winter allowance measured out in front of them and signed for, so no man had to ask twice for what was already his. The Ferris tenancy was struck to $1 a year for life. The old sick fund. The one Abigail had run out of egg money and butter money was to be a real fund, $400 a year out of the estate, and Nathaniel announced he would not be the one administering it. "Then who is?" Hattie said. "You are. Sir. You've been doing it for 11 years without the money. Now you'll do it with it." Thomas Reed rode in that afternoon and got off the horse and stood there. "Yard's talking. Let it talk. Nate, it's not just your yard. Delia Rusk's cousin married a Bowling Green man. Whatever you set up in that settlement was in the tavern before you were." Thomas took his hat off. "Is it true you stood up in a meeting house and told a room full of strangers you called your wife furniture?" "I didn't use that word. Ames used that word." "Is it true about the land?" "It's true." Thomas turned around, walked 6 paces, and stood with his back to him. "Tom, I'm all right." "You're not." I said I'm all right. When he turned back, his face was wrecked. "I've known that woman since your wedding. I knew about the Ferris rent. I knew about the poor fund. I sat at that table on the 9th of July and I said, 'Nate, and you didn't hear me,' and then I ate my supper." He put his hat back on and took it off again. "I didn't say it twice, Nathaniel. 11 years, and I never once said it twice. Neither did she. That's not a comfort. It wasn't meant as one. Court day in Bowling Green was the 11th of September, and by then, there was not a man in the county who didn't know, and they came out for it the way people come out for a hanging. Nathaniel sat the bench through 2 boundary disputes and a bastardy bond, and then he stood up. Before the next case, gentlemen. The courtroom went quiet in pieces. I'm going to say something that has nothing to do with the docket, and then we'll get on. Judge Peyton said carefully, Carter, 2 minutes, Judge. Nathaniel came down off the bench, which was the thing that made the room go still, because nobody had ever seen a magistrate in Caroline County come down off that bench in the middle of a session. Most of you were at my table on the 9th of July, or you've heard from a man who was. I want to correct the record, because I sit up there and take other men's oaths, and I'd be a poor thing if I couldn't manage the truth about myself. Colonel Ames in the 3rd row went red. I humiliated my wife in front of 11 men, and I let you laugh, and I want to say plainly that the laughing wasn't the crime. The crime was mine, and it was 11 years old before I ever opened my mouth. Colonel Ames, you asked her a question that night, and it was an unkind one. And if I'd been half a husband, I'd have let her answer it because her answer would have been better than mine. Ames said, Now see here, I'm not finished, and I'm not accusing you. I'm telling you that you asked my wife if she preferred the barns to a drawing room, and I answered for her, and here's what I found out since. He looked around the room. She'd been corresponding 6 years with a seed house in Philadelphia. They addressed her as A. Carter Esquire because they assumed a man had written those letters. A minister up in the northern part of the state read them and said they were the most sensible things he'd ever seen, written about soil, and he offered her a school in 1814 on the strength of them, and she turned it down 3 years running because her husband was in difficulty, and she reckoned a man shouldn't be left in a hard season. He heard a woman somewhere in the back say, Oh. So when the colonel asked whether she preferred barns, yes, she did. She preferred them the way you all prefer the thing you're best at in the world. He put his hands in his pockets. That's all. That's the correction. Judge, I'll hear the next case. He got about 4 steps. Mr. Carter? It was Mrs. Peyton standing up in the 3rd row on the women's side with her husband hissing her name. Ma'am, you've had your 2 minutes, and I'll take one. She was 70 years old and had buried 2 children and did not care in the least what any man in that room thought of her. I sat next to your wife at that dinner. I touched her wrist. I said, You've been quiet, my dear, and she said, Habit, and I laughed at it. I laughed, sir. Her voice shook and held. Then you said your piece, and I watched a woman decide her whole life in about 4 seconds, and I did not open my mouth because it was your table, and my husband had business with you. Sarah, said Judge Peyton. Be quiet, Charles. She looked around that courtroom. There are about 30 women in this room, and I would guess 25 of us have sat at a table and been described. I'd like the men to sit with that a minute, and then I'd like Mr. Carter to know that when his wife comes home, there will be a chair for her in my parlor on Tuesdays, and I'd like everyone to understand that I'm saying when. Nathaniel could not get his voice to work. Say thank you, Mr. Carter, said Mrs. Peyton. Thank you, ma'am. He went to the miller's on the way home. The mother came to the door and would not open it more than a foot. I'm not here about money, he said before she could start. I've got a thing to ask, and if you say no, I'll go and never come back. Ask it then. There's a fund at my place now, $400 a year for sickness and burying and winter, and Hattie runs it. And I don't want it going out in a basket with nobody's name on it because that's how it was done before, and I've learned what that does to a person. So somebody's got to knock on the doors, somebody who's been sat up with and knows how it's done. He turned his hat over. It pays $60 a year. I'd like it to be you. The door didn't move for a long moment. Why me? Because you're the only person in this county who told me to go home to my face. Mrs. Miller looked at him. My boy's name was Asa, she said. I know it. Say it. Asa Miller. She shut the door. He was on the horse when he heard it open again behind him, and she said to his back, $60. And he said $60. And she said, Tell your Hattie I'll come Monday, and shut it again. I went to Fredericksburg on the 20th to buy back 91 acres on the Mattapony, and that was the day the thing he had not counted on came for him. The Fredericksburg man had sold it on in 1815. The second owner had taken the timber off all of it, the whole 100-year stand oak and poplar, and the walnut that Abigail's grandfather had left standing on purpose, and floated it down to the yards in the spring of '16, and cleared $1,100, and sold the stripped ground on again, in '17, to a man who ran hogs on it. The hog man wanted $900 for stump land worth $300, because by then he had heard why the gentleman was asking. Nathaniel paid it in the office without a word, and walked outside and had to hold on to a post. He rode to 9 Mile the next morning instead of home, and Samuel Whitmore came out of the barn and saw his face and set down the bucket. "What's happened?" "I bought the 91 acres back." "That's so. The woods are gone, Mr. Whitmore." His voice did a thing he could not control. "They took them off in the spring of '16. It's stumps and hog wallow, and there's not a tree on it thicker than my wrist." Samuel Whitmore stood in his yard. "Her mother's woods." "Yes, sir." "Ruth Ann was married under a walnut on that ground." "I know it. It went down the river in 1816. Nathaniel took his hat off. "There's no fixing it. I've been 3 days trying to find the way to fix it, and there isn't one. I can't buy it back. It doesn't exist to buy." The old man sat down on the block he split wood on. "Well," he said, "Mr. Whitmore, sit down, son, you're swaying." He sat down in the dirt of his father-in-law's yard, and then he told him the rest of it because he had promised himself in Willow Creek that he would never again be a man who kept a thing quiet to spare himself a hard hour. "There's something else, and it's worse, and it's hers, and I'm telling you anyway, and she may never forgive me for it." "Then don't." "She's been carrying it alone 4 years, and I'm not going to let her do the 5th. Samuel Whitmore's face changed. "Nathaniel, April of 1815. She lost a child at 4 months while I was in Richmond." He made himself keep his eyes on the man. "It was a boy." The bucket went over. Neither of them picked it up. She was going to name him Samuel. Samuel Whitmore made a sound. Nathaniel had never heard a man make, and put both hands over his face, and Nathaniel Carter sat in the dirt beside a 55-year-old farmer while he came apart, and did not touch him, and did not speak, because there wasn't a thing on this earth that belonged in that space. It was some minutes. "She never told me," Whitmore said at last. "She said she didn't know how you tell a man he lost something he never knew he had. That's her mother in her. That's Ruth Ann exactly." He wiped his face with the flat of his hand. "Where is he?" "Under the pear at the end of the kitchen garden. There's a flat stone. She said it herself." "I want to see it." "You'll see it tomorrow. And there'll be a proper stone cut with his name on it, and it'll say, 'Son of Nathaniel and Abigail Carter,' and it will not go up until she says, 'It can because it's hers to say.'" Nathaniel's jaw worked. "But it's ordered. It's ordered and paid, and it's sitting in a shed in Bowling Green until she gives the word, and I told the cutter to keep it face down." Samuel Whitmore sat with that. "What are you going to do about the land?" "Plant it." "You know what you're saying?" "That's a 40-year job. That's longer than that. You put oak in the ground now, you'll be dead before there's anything worth the name of a tree on it." "Yes, sir." "Then what's the use of it?" And Nathaniel said, "None to me." And Samuel Whitmore looked at him for a long moment, and then got up off the block and went into the barn and came back out with 2 shovels. They started the following week. Nathaniel Whitmore, Eli 4 hired men, and by the second week, 11 more, because word had gotten around Caroline County that the magistrate was out on the Mattapony in his shirt sleeves setting seedlings by hand in a hog lot, and men rode out to see it, and then felt foolish sitting on a horse watching and got down. He wrote to her every Sunday. He never once asked her to come home. He had made himself a rule in the road at Willow Creek, and he kept it like a man keeps a fast. Abigail Mrs. Miller came Monday and has taken the fund and has told Hattie exactly how it will be run, and Hattie has told me she's the only person besides you who's ever argued her out of a position. Her boy's name was Asa. I say it when I see her. N.C. Abigail Ruth read a page out of the ledger to me on Thursday out loud in front of Hattie and got the word sundries and would not look up for a full minute after. She has asked whether she may keep on after she can read the ledger. I said she may keep on until she is tired of it, or dead. NC. Abigail, I am telling you this plainly, because I have learned what happens to a thing done quietly. I bought back the 91 acres on the Mattapony on the 20th of September for $900, which was 3 times its worth, and the deed is recorded in your name alone, and there are no conditions on it of any kind. You do not have to answer this letter. You do not have to come and look at it. It is yours whether I ever see you again or not. I have to tell you the rest, and I would rather cut my hand off. The timber was taken off in 1816. There is nothing standing on it. Your mother's walnut went down the river the spring before last, and I cannot get it back, and I have tried every way a man with money can try. Your father and I have put 4,000 seedlings in since the first week of October. It will not be woods in my lifetime. I know that. I am doing it anyway, and I want to say why in writing, so it is not a secret between us. I am not doing it to be forgiven. I am doing it because it is the only thing I have ever wanted to build that I will not be alive to be thanked for. NC. She did not answer. Not the first letter, not the 9th. In the 3rd week of October, a letter did come from Willow Creek, and his hands were not steady, opening it, and it was from Reverend Pike. Mr. Carter. She reads them twice. I have seen it. She keeps them in the back of a green notebook with a piece of twine, and she has not spoken of you to me one time, which I would call a bad sign in a woman who talked less, and a very good one in her. You should know the subscribers voted her a salary of $110 for next year. And that Amos Kern moved it, and that she cried, which none of us has seen before, and which frightened the whole meeting considerably. You should also know the term closes the last week of October. She has not said what she is doing after. She has not engaged a room for the winter. I would not read anything into that, and I would not fail to read anything into it either. J. Pike. Hattie found him with that letter 3 times in one evening. You're going up there? No. Mr. Carter. If I go up there in the last week of October, Nathaniel said, then whatever she decides isn't hers. She'll have decided it with me standing in the road looking at her. She's had 11 years of deciding things with a man in the room. He folded the letter. She'll do it by herself, or it isn't worth anything. And if she don't come, then she doesn't come, and the trees go in anyway, and Ruth reads the ledger anyway, and I'm the man who did all this and lost her, and that's the correct outcome, Hattie. That's what I earned. His voice went. I'd just rather not have it. The one letter she wrote him came on the 30th of October. It was 1 sheet, and there was 1 line on it, and no greeting, and no signature, and he stood in the yard and read it, and had to put his hand out to the fence. Did you say it out loud? He wrote back that night 1 sheet, 1 line, and paid a man $4 to write it north, 4 times under the pear on the 5th of September, and to your father in his yard on the 21st. 8 days later, he was on the strip to Hillside, on the Mattapony, with his knees in the mud, setting seedlings with Eli working the row above him and Samuel Whitmore below, and he heard a cart come up the track and did not turn around because carts came up that track all day now. It stopped. Nathaniel. He was on his knees in a hog lot with mud to his elbows and a bundle of switches in his hand, and he turned around, and Abigail Whitmore was standing at the head of the track with one trunk beside her in the grass, the old one with AW still burned in the lid. You planted the north face first, she said. He couldn't speak. That's wrong. Her voice was not steady at all. The north face holds wet. You want your oak on the south slope and your poplar in the low ground, and if you'd asked me in September, I'd have told you, and you'd have saved 1,100 trees. Nathaniel Carter got up out of the mud. Abby, he said, what do you think? She looked at him for a long moment with the mud on his knees and the switches in his hand, and the whole hillside gone quiet behind him, because Eli had stopped working, and Samuel Whitmore had come up out of the low ground, and every hired man on that slope had turned around. Say it again, Abigail said. What do you think, Abby? About the trees. About anything. His voice was not working right. About the trees, about the corn, about the fund, about Ruth, about what I ought to do with the rest of my life. Pick one. I'll take any of them. She set her hand on the trunk beside her like she needed something under it. "I think you've killed 1,100 oaks," she said. "And I think if you'd asked one question in September, instead of digging like a man doing penance, they'd all be alive." "That's fair." "It isn't fair. It's true. Don't you dare start agreeing with everything I say." And then her face went, and she put her hand over her mouth, and Samuel Whitmore came up that hill faster than a man of 55 ought to move. "Abby." "Daddy." He got both arms around her, and she made a sound into her father's shoulder that no one on that hillside ever repeated afterward, not in a tavern, not in a kitchen, not once. "He told me," Samuel said into her hair, "about the boy. He come out here and sat in my dirt and told me. He had no right. No, he didn't." The old man held her out at arm's length. "And he done it anyway, and he knowed you might not forgive him for it, and he done it anyway. And Abby girl, I've had 4 years of you carrying that by yourself and me not helping. 4 years I could have had that with you." His voice broke clean in half. "Don't you take that off him. That's the first thing that man ever spent that cost him something." She stood there in the mud with her father's hands on her arms. "I'm not forgiving him for it," she said. "All right. I'm just not going to make him pay for it either." "That'll do," said Samuel Whitmore. "That'll do fine." She did not go up to the house that night. That was the first thing, and it took the wind out of everybody, including Hattie, who had had a room aired since noon on the strength of a rumor. "I'll stay at my father's," Abigail said in the yard with her trunk still in the cart. "Abigail, don't." She held up a hand. "Nathaniel, I have been in that house 11 years as a fixture, and 11 weeks as a ghost. And if I walk in that door tonight and sleep in that bed, then by Friday I'm the mistress of the place again, and everybody will be relieved, and it will be over, and nothing will have changed, except that I came back." "Then what do you want?" "I want terms." He looked at her. "You want terms? I've spent 11 years without a single one." Her chin was up. "You're a magistrate. You've written 100 agreements for other men. Write one for your wife." Hattie on the steps said, "Lord God," under her breath, and went inside and shut the door so they could have it out. They had it out for 3 hours at the long table, with a candle between them and paper. And it was the strangest night of Nathaniel Carter's life, because his wife negotiated with him the way Harlan Crabtree had negotiated over a schoolhouse note flat prepared unhurried with numbers. 1. The estate accounts are mine in writing and I sign the drafts. Done. Don't say done that fast, you don't know what's coming. I'll say done as fast as I like. It's the 4th time in my life I've been asked my opinion about my own money by somebody who understood it better than me. 2. She did not look up. I'm not giving up the school. His hands went still on the table. Willow Creek's 90 miles. I know how far it is, I walked most of it in June. She wrote a line. Reverend Pike has a girl he's been training since August. Susanna Kern, 17 and twice as quick as I ever was, and she can keep it from spring. But I told those 11 families I'd see the term out, and I intend to see the term out, and after that, I want a school here. Here. In this county, for the workers' children and the tenants' children and anybody else who'll come, and I want it built and paid, and I want my name on the deed of it, not yours, and I want to hire the teacher myself, and I do not want you in the room when I do it. Nathaniel sat back. Ask me for the money. That's not the point. I know it's not the point. Ask me anyway. He leaned forward. Abigail, in 11 years, you never asked me for $1. You took egg money out of your own dairy to pay another man's rent rather than ask me. I want to hear it once. Just once out loud, so I know what it sounds like in this house. She put the pen down. It took her a while, and he watched her work at it, and he understood that he was watching a woman try to lift something she had never in her life been permitted to lift. I need $800, Abigail said, to build a school. You'll have it Monday. And she put her face in her hands and laughed, wrecked, shaking the laugh from the Willow Creek schoolyard in his dining room at his table. Three, she said when she could. The table. What about it? I'm never sitting at the end of it again. He got up, without a word, walked the length of the room, took the Carver chair from the head of the table, and carried it out the door and across the yard, and Abigail followed him as far as the steps and watched him hand a $200 chair to Eli in the dark. Eli, Your mother's got a bad back. Sir, take it home to her. Mr. Carter, I can't. You can, and if anybody stops you on that road, you tell them the magistrate gave it you at 10 o'clock at night in front of his wife. He came back up the steps. Anything else? Abigail was staring at him. 4, she said unsteadily. The stone. It's face down in a shed in Bowling Green. I know, you wrote it. She wrapped her arms around herself. Nathaniel, I want to see it before it goes up. I want to see it alone, and I don't want to be asked afterward how I felt about it. Then you won't be. And when it goes up, I want everybody there. Everybody. Hattie and Ruth and my father and the Millers and the whole yard, and I want it read out loud. Why out loud? Because he was in this world 4 months, and nobody but me ever said he was. Her voice went down almost to nothing. I'd like more than 2 people to have said his name. They put the stone up on the 14th of November with 46 people standing in a kitchen garden. Reverend Pike came down from Willow Creek to do it 90 miles at 58 years old and would not take a cent for the trip. He read the name off the stone twice and asked the whole company to say it once, and 46 voices said, Samuel Whitmore Carter into the cold, and Abigail did not cry until the end, and then she cried in front of every one of them and let herself be seen doing it, which Hattie said afterward was the thing that finally convinced her the woman was home. Samuel Whitmore stood at that grave for an hour after everyone else had gone in. Nathaniel came out and stood beside him. You planted the north face first, Whitmore said. You've told me. I'm going to keep telling you. It's the only advantage I've got left. The old man wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Nathaniel. Sir, that's twice now you've called me sir and meant it. He put his hat on. You keep that up and I might get used to it, and then I won't be able to hate you comfortable no more. Colonel Ames came out to the estate 2 weeks later, and nobody had invited him. He stood in the front hall with his hat in his hands and would not sit down, and he was 62 years old and had commanded a regiment and could not get his sentence started. Mrs. Carter. Colonel, I asked you a question at that table. He got it out in a rush. About whether you preferred the Barnes, and I want you to know I asked it to get a laugh out of the men, and I got one, and it wasn't from you, and it wasn't about you, it was about... He stopped. It was about me wanting to be the cleverest man at another man's table. I've thought about it every day since September. Abigail did not help him. Nathaniel watched her, not help him, and thought good. Ma'am, I'd like to ask it again, properly. And I'd like your answer this time, and not your husband's. All right. Do you prefer the Barnes? Yes, Abigail said. Ames waited. That's the whole answer, Colonel. Ma'am, you expected an explanation. She almost smiled. Men always expect the explanation. I don't owe you one. I like the Barnes. I like soil. I have opinions about lime and clover that would bore you into your grave, and I have been right about them for 11 years. She stepped back. You may come to supper on Thursday, and you may ask me anything you like about drainage, and I will talk until you're sorry you asked. Ames laughed a startled, cracked-open sound and said, Mrs. Carter, I believe I'd enjoy that, and came on Thursday and stayed until 11, and afterward told half the county that the plainest woman in Caroline County had explained subsoil to him for 2 hours, and he had learned more than in 6 years on the Turnpike Commission. By December, the story had gotten out of everybody's hands entirely. It had gone to Richmond. It had gone up the Rappahannock and down to Port Royal, and it had grown the way stories grow, and one version had Nathaniel walking to Willow Creek barefoot, and another had Abigail refusing a carriage, and a third had a duel in it that never happened, and the true version, which was worse and better than all of them, got told mostly by women in kitchens, and it got told with a particular emphasis that made men uneasy in a way they could not name. Mrs. Peyton held her Tuesday parlor. Abigail went and hated it, and went again. Why do you keep going? Nathaniel asked her. You come home worn out every week. Because there were 11 women in that room yesterday, Abigail said, and 4 of them stayed after, and one of them asked me very carefully the way you ask a thing you've rehearsed how a woman goes about learning to keep books. She untied her bonnet. Her husband's 63 and drinks, and she can't read a column, and she's terrified of what happens to her and 3 children when he goes. What did you tell her? I told her to come Thursday morning. Here, to the kitchen. Hattie's teaching Ruth at 8. She can sit in. She looked at him. Is that all right? Abigail. I'm asking. I said I'd ask when it's your house too. It's not my house. He said it flatly without heat. It's never been my house. I've been a boarder in a place you ran for 11 years, and I paid for the roof and thought that made me the owner. She stood in the doorway with her bonnet in her hands. That's the best thing you've ever said to me. It's the worst thing I've ever found out about myself. Yes, she said. That's usually how it goes. By January, there were 9 women coming Thursday mornings. By February, there were 14, and Hattie had run out of chairs and started them in shifts, and Nathaniel had learned to be out of the house by 7:30. And one Thursday in March, he came back early and stood in the passage without going in, and heard his wife say, "And if he won't tell you the figure, you write down what goes out of the house instead. Butter, eggs, cloth, corn, everything. You'll have his figure inside 4 months, and he'll never know how you got it." 14 women laughed. Nathaniel Carter stood in his own passage and thought with a clarity that stopped his breath. She has been doing this her whole life. She just never had a room. The thing he had not counted on came in the spring, and it came from Willow Creek. Reverend Pike's letter arrived the 2nd week of April, and it was 5 lines long, and the last one was the one that mattered. Susanna Kern has taken the school and is doing well and cries less than expected. The subscribers wish me to say the position remains hers only, so long as she wants it, and that if ever Mrs. Whitmore, I am told I must write Mrs. Carter now, and I find I do not like it much, should wish to come back to us, this settlement would sell the mill to have her. J. Pike. Abigail read it in the yard, and folded it, and put it in her apron, and said nothing about it for 6 days. On the 6th night at the table, she said, "Nathaniel. If I asked to go back to Willow Creek." He set his fork down. He did it carefully because his hands had gone stupid. For the summer or for good, answer the question I asked. All right. He made himself look at her. If you asked to go back to Willow Creek, I'd have Eli hitch the cart, and I'd send your books after you, and I'd write to you Sundays about Ruth and the fund and the trees, and never once about the accounts, and I'd keep planting that hillside until I dropped. And you wouldn't come. Not unless you sent for me. You'd let me go. Abigail, he said. I have spent a year learning that the only thing I ever did to you was decide what you were. I'm not going to do it again in the other direction. If you want that town, it's yours. You don't need my permission, and you never did. The difference is that now you know it, and now I know it, and that's the whole of what I've got to offer. She was quiet a long time. I'm not going, she said. Then why did you? Because I needed to hear you say it. She picked her fork back up, and her hand was shaking, and she put it down again. 11 years I made every decision in this house by working out what you'd tolerate. Every single one. I never once found out what you'd allow, because I never once asked. And I couldn't come the rest of the way home until I knew that the door I walked in was one I could walk back out of. It is. I know it now. Any day. I know, Nathaniel. I'll say it again in a year if you need it. I'll probably need it, Abigail said. Twice. The school opened in June, a year to the month from the night she left, and it was a plain building on 2 acres of Carter land, deeded to Abigail Whitmore. Carter alone, and there were 31 children in it on the first day, and 19 of them belonged to families who worked that estate. Nathaniel was not asked to speak, and did not offer. He stood at the back with Thomas Reed, while his wife told 31 children that nobody in the room was in a hurry, and Thomas leaned over and said, "You all right?" "I'm fine." "You're crying, Nate." "I'm aware of it. First time I've seen it since your mother's funeral." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "That's about right." Ruth kept the household ledger from the following January in a hand that got better every month, and in 1821 she married a man from Port Royal, and Abigail gave her the 4 notebooks, the copies, not the originals, as a wedding gift. And Ruth wrote back that spring to say she had settled an argument about her husband's cornfield by opening a book to page 9. Mrs. Miller ran the fund for 19 years. She knocked on every door herself, and she said her name at every one of them, and there was never once again a basket left in Caroline County with nobody's name on it because the woman would not permit it. Hattie died in the winter of 1824, in a room in that house, and Abigail sat with her the last 4 nights, and Nathaniel sat the last one too. And near the end, Hattie opened her eyes and looked at the pair of them sitting on either side of her bed, and said quite clearly, "Well, that took long enough," and went back to sleep. And that was the last thing she said to anybody. Samuel Whitmore lived to be 74. He spent 11 springs on the Mattapony hillside with a bucket and a dibble and a running commentary on the north face. And when he died, Nathaniel carried one corner of him, and the oaks on the south slope were 14 feet high. They never got the woods back. That was true, and Abigail never once pretended otherwise, and every so often through the years she would ride out there and stand in the middle of 4,000 young trees, no thicker than a wrist, and be furious all over again for about an hour, and come home quiet. "It's not the same," she said once. "No, it's never going to be the same." "No, it isn't." "Say the rest of it." "There is no rest of it," Nathaniel said. "It's gone. I did that. I put my name on a note out of vanity in 1814, and 100 years of your mother's trees went down the river because of it, and there's no sentence at the end of that, which makes it come out even." Abigail nodded slowly. "Do you know," she said, "that's the only reason I can stand to sit here." "What is?" "That you never once tried to make it come out even. The last of it. The part that got told and retold in that county for 30 years, long after both of them were in the ground under the pear tree, happened on an ordinary morning in the autumn of 1822, and there was nobody there to see it but the two of them and Hattie's replacement, a girl named Cassie, who told it for the rest of her life. Nathaniel Carter came down the back stairs at 6 in the morning and stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom. Somebody was singing in the kitchen. He stood there with his hand on the rail. He had heard that voice for 14 years giving instructions, reading figures, saying goodnight. Nathaniel down the length of a table, and he had never in his life heard it do this, and he understood standing on that stair with an accuracy that took the strength out of his legs that she must have been able to sing the entire time. That in the whole of the first 11 years she had never once done it inside these walls, because a woman does not sing in a house where nobody is listening. Cassie came out of the pantry and saw him standing there and opened her mouth to announce him. Nathaniel put his finger to his lips. The girl looked at him. Then she looked past him toward the kitchen, and something crossed her face, and she nodded and went back into the pantry and shut the door. He sat down on the stair. He was 41 years old and a magistrate of Caroline County, and he sat down on his own back stairs in his shirt sleeves like a boy hiding from a lesson, and he listened to his wife sing an entire song through twice, and he did not interrupt her, and he did not go in, and he did not thank her for it afterward, and he never told her he had heard it. That was the whole of it. That was the thing he had been trying to learn for 5 years, and had ridden 90 miles, and stood up in 2 rooms full of people, and planted 4,000 trees to get at. And it turned out to be nothing you could buy, and nothing you could announce, and nothing you could put your name to. It was a man sitting still on a staircase letting a woman finish. Abigail Carter lived to be 68 years old. She buried her husband in 1849 and put him under the pear beside their son. And she kept the school until the year she died. And there are people in Caroline County today who cannot tell you the name of a single magistrate who ever sat that bench, but whose grandmothers learned to read their own account books at a kitchen table on a Thursday morning, because a woman nobody looked at got up from a dinner table in July of 1817, curtsied to the man who owned everything, and walked out with $11 in her pocket. She was never plain. She was never quiet. She was never a woman who kept a house warm and nothing more. She was simply for 11 years in a room with a man who had not yet learned that the whole of love is one thing and one thing only, noticing that another person is there. He learned it. It cost him everything he had, and he spent the rest of his life paying it gladly. And on the morning he died, she was holding his hand, and he said her name, and she heard it.